show. This is going to be kind of introducing one of the upcoming tournaments. One of the upcoming player-run tournaments this year. With me today, I have Mawderator. Say hello, Maud.
Hey, I'm Mawderator, former AT captain, and now washed out AT tournament commentator.
We also have Rahne Chocolat.
Hello, I am a AT commentator.
And alongside, we have Cyclo Hexanol.
Hey, I'm a two-time AT captain and made a pretty good run last year as well with Spook. Or there was Barcode then.
Yeah, and today we're going to be going over kind of some of the format and also just introducing and getting hyped about the teams, because all of the information that we need to know about this tournament is now out there in the public. And to start with, I suppose we're going to dive a little into the rules here. And that's the first thing that really differentiates this tournament from anything else we've seen before, is that, compositions are not built by points. They are built by classes. So you have to fill 6 slots, and that's your T1 support, your T2 support, your tackle, your light cruiser, your heavy cruiser, and your battle cruiser. And Cyclo, can you tell us a little bit about how that kind of changes making a setup in this version of the rules versus, say, the Alliance tournament?
It changes absolutely everything. In the Alliance tournament, you have so many different metas. You have like your 2 cruise battleship metas. You have these Balgorn metas, but you also, at the same time, have very effective metas that have no battleships at all, like just battle cruiser rush comps. I think there were quad battle cruiser things going on. And it kind of limits your decision making and the choices that you can make. However, it opens up the meta to some really interesting decisions that comp creators and pilots alike can make.
Yeah, and that's kind of the main crux of this tournament. All the information is kind of presented beforehand, so we can talk about it, and so you guys can see what people are bringing. And it's not just what they're bringing, it's also who they're bringing, because we have, full roster locks here. And what that means is that each team had to submit a selection of 9 players that would be flying for them in this tournament, rather than having a kind of open alliance-based structure like we normally see in the AT. And that kind of constrains who you can bring and what skill sets you can bring. And it forces you to try and look for the best pilots in your group of friends and make a real group of stars. And we've seen that represented in some of the teams, which we'll get to later. But, what is it like in a normal alliance tournament? What do teams look like in terms of size?
Well, obviously on the field, it's been anywhere between 10 to 12 people that have been on like an actual field. This, of course, has much less players on the grid, so it's easier logistically to organize practice. But one of the really nice things about that is that you can also practice internally. I know a couple teams have done that because there's just less logistical requirements on your end to make that work. So that's one of the conscious decisions that I believe you've made, Jin, as a tournament organizer.
Yeah, one of the other things that it let us do is it also let us make sure that every team was kind of its own individual unit, and that there weren't any kind of B teams or teams that didn't seem, or teams that weren't just there for them. And I think that's really important, because it means that, especially in this format where every match really, really counts, you're going to get a lot of close games and people trying to bring out their secret strategies, and there's going to be a lot more intensity a lot faster in the tournament because of that, or at least that's my and that's probably actually a good segue into the second section that we're going to talk about here, other than just the basics of the rules, and that's the format, because it isn't the double elimination 64-man tournament that we're used. Can we bring that up, Ray?
Yeah, we can do that.
Awesome.
There, you should be able to see it. I'll move Cyclo. There you go.
Awesome. And this also gives us the matches, which we're going to come back to a little later. But after the first match, absolutely every match is either a win to stay in, as in if you lose, you're going to go out of the tournament, or if you win, you get to go through to the next game. That adds just so much more pressure even to the upper brackets. What is it like to try and fly under that pressure in a tournament situation?
It's actually kind of terrifying to fly under that pressure in a tournament situation, especially if your team's practiced a lot, knowing that the next 10 minutes, maybe less, is going to decide whether or not all that practice was more or less for nothing. Hundreds of hours.
And what is practice really like? You know, I've been lucky enough to go through and sit in with some of these teams on their practice. What is the regimen like for these teams? You were in fact the captain of one of the first winning team. We should probably make the audience aware of that. Or sorry, not the captain, the co-captain, I believe, of Spooky Action #1.
I was the co-captain of Spooky Action #1, and practice usually, it depends from team to team. It's very intense. It's like going through the actual tournament match itself. You set up the timer, you have a countdown, you have all the same rules. If you boundary, then that guy's got to warp off. It's exactly like the tournament, but with a lot less pressure. Unless you're really afraid of your friends calling you out on being terrible.
Yeah, I've seen that happen a couple of times. It's very it's certainly amusing. There's nothing that gets people fired up more than that, or perhaps debates on fitting. Those are the two things that tend to come to blows when practice is coming. And that's also the other thing. It's not just ships that are locked in this format. The fits are locked in as well. So you can't last minute change if you find out what your opponents are going to be bringing, which I know is something that's very important normally in the tournament meta.
I think the fits being known too really, really helps those behind the scenes. So like us commentators, the analysts, etc. Because many times during tournaments like the Alliance tournament, you don't know, and that's a huge factor in like players actually succeeding. Because you as a commentator, you don't know like like if a ship's bringing like missile disruptor or like tracking disruptor, like little things like that, as well as like little tweaks to their fits. So like you can kind of sit and commentate or analyze afterwards and say, well, we think it was this, we think it was that. The only way you really know is if they died and you were able to get the Z kill while being on air.
Yeah, and it also changes how the meta develops, as in the meta doesn't develop as the tournament goes on anymore. The meta develops itself completely before the tournament even starts, before the deadline, because those teams have to practice those setups, try and think of what they're going to see in the general meta, copy it, see if they can beat it in some interesting way, see what's weak, see what's strong. And moving through that process is a pretty interesting experience. Moderator, do you have any input on that?
Yeah, I mean, having gone from most of the lower bracket going to third place, it's an absolutely harrowing experience, just grinding out practice and competing, just back-to-back matches. So I've been there, done that, don't ever want to do that again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's only just going to add to the pressure as well when it comes to the deciding match. Because they're going to have so few compositions to choose from. After bans, they only get to pick between 2 compositions. You know, what does that like? You're one of the few people who've been in a situation where that's the case so far, Cyclo. How did that feel?
Sorry, could you repeat the question real quick?
In the deciding rounds in the first day, we're going to get to the point where the team captains can only choose between two compositions, because they'll use two up, and both teams will be able to ban one composition of their opponents. So both of them are going to know the two possible compositions their opponents have and their own compositions. So it's like a very intense game of rock, paper, scissors if they haven't made their compositions right.
Yeah, it can be really interesting in that final match to make that decision. I haven't had to put a lot of thought into that decision itself. However, having seen the process done a couple times with a few different teams, generally the captains or whoever's making the decision, whether it's them or the entire team, starts to think, what will this team want to bring in order to secure their victory? What's their strongest comp? What are they most comfortable in? And to actually get a good answer to that, you have to know a little bit about the pilots, where they usually fly. Like faction warfare pilots are probably more likely to bring a brawl comp than a kite comp, right? And you've got to make a lot of considerations before you make that choice. What do you think, Mod? You might have better input than me.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily super impactful what kind of background, at least on Tranquility, the pilots have, though that can be a factor. I think it's mostly you'll see at least the more experienced teams will be playing with whatever they feel perform the best in internal scrims. But some of the more faction warfare teams, like you were previously alluding to, a lot of them will kind of go with what they know. But we're not seeing any Macarials this time around, which, you know, aren't a thing. So that's not going to be a thing anymore.
Mm-hmm. Something also that this brings in is that there are, you know, a limited number of ships that can fill any specific. And you can probably talk some more about like what roles in particular are limited by this format. Could you speak about that, Rain? Actually, like, what are some of the ships that compositions have mostly been built around, or you feel that bring unique effects to this format?
Yeah, I was gonna say let me pull up the fits, but I actually don't have them offhand, or not the fits, the comps. So a lot of people, I mean, obviously when you're building some of these comps, so like one thing to keep in mind is that like there's no logi whatsoever. So teams really have to kind of keep that in mind when building these comps. But saying that, because a lot of times when people don't use logi, they just kind of pick whatever, I want to say whatever is the best DPS, but then you have to think of items such as like links. So you can have battle cruisers, which get link bonuses, as well as command destroyers, which get link bonuses. So when teams are building those sort of comps and they want to build it around the links, so if you want armor links or items such as like skirm links where you're a little bit kitier, or you're trying to focus more on like an E-war comp, then you have to kind of factor in the links as well as all your other ships to kind of keep those comps together. I don't know if you were trying to ask me, Jen, to allude to the Drake Navy and how many people have actually picked the Drake Navy, but we have seen a ton of folks. I think it was like 4 out of the 8 teams, so half of them actually having a comp with the Drake Navy.
No, I'm gonna save that for the composition section.
Okay.
But you know, we do it. There are some interesting things, like the Hyena is the only ship in this format that has a web bonus, and like some ships have taken it. Some most teams have taken it. At least they've taken it in the comp. At the maximum amount of comps they can have, which is 1. You know, they've made sure to put it in their roster. But one of the ships that I thought was super interesting there was actually the Dragoon. And that's because it's the only ship in that particular slot that has any bonus to neuting.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that it gains a ton more value than it has on Tranquility, just by the nature of where it sits in this form.
The Dragoon's also going to have a lot of tank, so its survivability is going to be kind of high, making it a less good target. And it's also going to be pretty good as a screen or tackle. So I'll be interested to see how that plays out. I definitely didn't see that pick coming personally.
Yeah.
No, I didn't either. I also saw a Korax, which I think that might just be a bad choice.
Hey, it got buffed. It got buffed in the last patch. So don't
it did get buffed. It did get buffed.
If you have to make 5 complete comps and you can't reuse any ships, I can see how the odd bad choice might slip through, to be honest.
Well, why don't we tell the audience a little bit about what the teams are playing for, though? Who wants to get the illustrious job of reading that?
Sure. So, tournament players, we know how much they love faxes. So each first place team member is going to get an Apostle Lava Core Imperial skin. That's going to look very nice. And 500 Plex per person. Second place is going to get a Direct Vac Meta Materia Exotica skin and 200 Plex per player. And third place gets a Hecate Kali Neon skin and 100 Plex per player. And Jin, you'd also mentioned that there are going to be some competition so that the viewers on Twitch will have an opportunity to win something.
Yeah, there is going to be a Twitch clips competition running each day, and the commentators are going to select their 5 favorite clips of the game as it goes on. And then we're going to debate amongst ourselves what clip is the best. Every clip that gets chosen in that top 5 is going to get a plus. Every player who makes a clip in that top 5 is going to get a set of +5 implants, and the player who makes the best clip is going to get 5 large skill injectors as well. And that's going to run for both days. And alongside that, we've had Rahne reach out and select about 4 billion ISK, I think it was, worth of skins for us to give out to chat over the course of the 2 days.
Yeah, I definitely made sure there were some solid skins in that, so I'm excited for folks. So if you're going to be watching, definitely be participating in chat. That doesn't mean spam the chat, that just means be active in the chat. And then, Jin, did you also mention people could kind of, I want to say pick'ems, like do some sort of like guessing, sort of bracketeering with this?
We can't promise that just yet. We don't have the tech entirely sorted, but we're hoping to get it up and running.
So I leaked
and
it.
There will be some skin prizes for the top 10 and top 100 of that.
Yeah, so hopefully, ideally, if folks aren't really interested in actually watching the matches or have to, be at work or whatever, they can still sort of participate kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah, it means that everyone has a reason to care about every match as well as the teams. And speaking of the team, let's talk a little bit about who is going to be competing for those wonderful, wonderful prizes. And also the first matchups they're going to be playing, because we know that at this point as well. And the first match is going to be Zero Talent, which is kind of an NC Dot and Tuska's all-star team, going up versus Red versus. Who wants to tell us a little bit about one of these teams?
I can talk about Red versus Blue. I feel like Red versus Blue is just like token in almost every tournament that happens. Like they fly in the AT together as one team. So for those who are unaware, Red Alliance versus Blue Alliance. They're sort of like high sec, low sec, null sec group that all hang out. They're constantly at a war. And then whenever tournaments come around, they all sort of team up and sort of battle with each other to try and gain victory. And they've actually done pretty well in like alliance tournaments and other tournaments in the past. So, I mean, I'm kind of excited for them. I think that they definitely deserve a place amongst this tournament.
And maybe one of you two tournament veterans can bring us through the roster of Zero Talent, because that's probably, in my opinion, one of the favorites to make day 2.
Sure. So I don't have the exact roster of Zero Talent on hand. I don't know if we have that.
It's on the stream actually now.
Okay, nice. So Zero Talent, Hoodie Mafia, former Tuskers captain, now with NC Dot, Jose Zampano, formerly of Stay Frosty, and now with Zero Talent, Nudispar and BAP, both NC players. Frankie Saskin, he was in Hard Knocks, and you've got Kellen Darklight, who's been an amazing solo player and one of the people who won one of the Golden Magnates. Annie Gardette, Carl Roken, and Crowler Darkland. Yeah, this is just an all-star roster of Hoodie Mafia scooping up whatever tournament players he can that he's friends with.
Yeah, it is going to be great to watch this compete, honestly. But who do you think is going to win this first match then, Cyclo?
This first match, I got to say, I love Red versus Blue. I think that Nikolai Mazinkov, even though he's not the captain of this team, every year for the AT, he put together a pretty great team and had a really good showing. but I've got to give it to Zero Talent. I think that prior experience and practice will win out with these pilots.
Yeah, I can't wait to see some of these. I can't wait to see if Red versus Blue has something like special in mind, though. I think if there's ever a time you try and bring out something crazy or something that may work or might not work, it's going to be in a match like this. You know, we have a team, in fact, in the next match, who did something similar to that to Hydra. Was it Hydra? Who was it that got knocked out by Templars in like the first round?
Yeah, that was Hydra.
Oh, it was Hydra. Awesome. I remember my AT history.
And that team, of course, would be Templars.
Yes, it would.
Generally, Templars is a team led by the Last Spartan, who anyone in Caldari or probably Galente Faction Warfare will know that pilot. He runs a pretty tight team. He practices with the team hard. He makes sure everyone stays on task, improves skills. I like following this team's history and their matches, and they always have a somewhat interesting meta. It's often a little different than most teams in the tournament, but they make it work for them okay.
Yeah, and facing up against them, we have another low-sec team. We have Stay Frosty, and that's Rix Javix's team. He's been in tournaments for, well, as long as I've been watching tournaments for, and his team has always done relatively well. As we mentioned earlier, Jose Zampano came out of his team, and Rix has always found a good job of kind of collecting some of the better low-sec pirates together and just keeping that old school way of playing alive. And I feel like that way of playing is just going to translate to this tournament so well, because it's not about that careful, planned, strategic, outthink your opponents and bring that comp for them thing. It's going to be more of a brutal slugfest, more of a rough and tumble affair, and that's going to fit those guys perfectly, I think.
Yes, Dave Frosty's generally been a team for newer teams and kind of upcoming rosters to test themselves against, get a litmus test for where they're at in the tournament scene, and that should be an interesting match. I look forward to seeing two kind of low-sec entities duke it out for that spot.
Yeah, does anyone have any thoughts on this match? Because personally, I think this is one of the harder ones to call, honestly.
This is going to be my favorite day one match, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think
wow,
of all
really?
of them, I think out of all of them that are going to be really close, it's definitely going to be this one. Like some of the other ones, you can kind of see as like Zero Talent versus Red versus Blue. Like I believe it was Cyclo that said it. Like Zero Talent has a lot of folks in there that can like really really dominate the field. So Red versus Blue would be a huge upset if they beat Zero Talent. But Templars versus Stay Frosty, I think is just going to be one that's really really hard to call.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's any kind of rivalry there?
Not that
I mean,
but they've been both in the same tournaments for the longest time. I don't think they've ever really met though to build up any sort of long-term rivalry. But I'm sure Cyclo would know a little bit more about Stay Frosty and Templeton. I would.
I actually don't have a lot of information on them ever meeting in the tournament. I was just going to say that I know that Stay Frosty are low-sec pirates who like to hang out around Black Rise in that area, so I could definitely see some personal piloting rivalries between some.
Awesome. Well, now we get onto my personal favorite match of day one, because I am nothing if not the showman, and we have Goons, House Goondor, led by Dirk Style, which is a new kind of tournament captain for Goonswarm, going up against Brave Nubbies, which is the Brave Newbies team, being run by Catalia and Yukiko. And, you know, that's really interesting because we don't normally associate Brave Newbies with good piloting. I think that's one of the historic things that's always been true. But Yukiko is someone we've seen AT after AT put in amazing individual piloting work. And Catalia is someone who was kind enough to let me sit in on her practices. And she was doing an absolutely amazing job of marshalling her people. And getting them excited to practice. There was nothing but 6v6 internals for days on end, it seemed. It was great to just go and watch the meta develop with them.
Yeah, it's always really encouraging to see that many people want to get into the tournament scene. And as people have, mentioned, I've always been a huge fan of Yukiko Kami. Got to meet him, and he's been just a really solid logistics pilot. Unfortunately, no Logi in this tournament for him, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what he can do.
Yeah, and I think who was it? It was Brave Newbies that got like top 8, I think, in one of the first Alliance tournaments that they like really tried at. It was AT15, and they were just the Cinderella story, the underdogs. And I think kind of the same goes for Goons. Like they may not have finished top 8, but Goons are almost always the underdogs in Alliance tournament, which is, or not the, yeah, in the Alliance tournament or tournaments in general, which is drastically different than how they're perceived on like Tranquility. So having these two sort of like newer-ish kind of underdog teams go against each other is going to be great.
Goons have been somewhat woefully, what's the word? Maybe inept in tournaments so far. I'm thinking, of course, of the last AT, which is what comes to mind really quickly. But I've actually heard from a few members of the Goon team that this captain, Dirk, what was his name? Dirk Statiel? Yeah, Dirk Statiel is actually doing a really good job at training his pilots and getting them ready. And looking at their comp list, if it was the same Goon captains and pilots as we'd seen in the past, with no changes, then I think their comps would be a lot worse than they are right now. I think they have a pretty decent chance here.
Are you saying that you think that these are kind of a better version of a Goon pilot than we've seen before in the?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of the same pilots, like I believe Zintage and Naka was on their last AT team. However, this is definitely a better iteration, at least from the strategy point of view.
That's really interesting. So, well, who does everyone think is going to win this match? I know personally that my money is actually on Brave Newbies. They just really impressed me with their work ethic, but they were a late entry to this tournament. They haven't had that much time to prepare. They've only had about 2 weeks' notice, and they somehow managed to get 5 compositions ready to go and all practice. I don't know. We're going to have to see, but I think they are in with a good shot.
Goons are kind of my underdog, and if you told me I'd be rooting for one of their teams like a year ago, I'd laugh at you, but I'm kind of rooting for Dirk.
I'm gonna go with Brave. Like I definitely love the Brave story, and I've met Yukiko. He's a great dude, so I'm really cheering for Brave in this one.
Mawderator, do you want to chime in on this?
I think it could go either way, but I think looking at the comps, I really want to know what's going to get banned between the two. We'll talk about that later, but I'm 50-50, but I'll give it to my boy Yukiko.
Awesome. And then the final matchup that we have to talk about is Spooky Action at a Distance versus Old Daddy J's Best Boys. The two longest teams in the longest names of the tournament in the same match. I love random number generators. And I gotta say, this is gonna be really interesting because this is the previous winners minus their co-captain going up against GMVA, and GMVA have had decent showings in tournaments in the past, and Spooky Action have had very, very good, obviously, results in this tournament series. So it's going to be two kind of relative veteran teams facing off against one another. Although personally, I'm obviously going to give my edge to the reigning champion, Spooky Action here. I think Vordak and his team are gonna be putting in the bar, and if GMVA can beat that, then fair enough, but it's going to be a tough ride for them.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a bit of history with both teams. I mean, I've known a lot of the guys on Spooky Action at a Distance for the better part of half a decade, Vordak Gallagher, and I go way back. And I actually started out in EVE as a faction warfare player in the corp that is being represented here with GMVA. So, I mean, I've known a lot of these guys for some time, and I want both of them to do well, of course, but I mean, looking at the roster of Spooky Action at a distance, I got to give it to them.
Yeah.
Completely unbiased opinion here, of course, but just looking at the comp setups of Best Boys versus Spooky Action, I just don't see the Best Boys comps as being better. In fact, I think they're quite a bit worse, with a few picks like core axes and things like that just don't really belong there. And that on top of what I would expect to be superior experience and cohesion of the Spooky team, I've got to hand it to Spooky.
Yeah. GMVA, by the way, are being led by Juliana Sota, and they're a great crew of guys. I've hung around with a lot of them. I'm really rooting for them to pull up an upset, but it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, I'm gonna cheer for GMVA or the Best Boys. I know a lot of the guys on the Spooky Action team, so I'm definitely gonna cheer for GMVA because I also know them. But then what else? I always like cheering for the underdogs.
All right. Well, with that, we've got all the actual information out of the way. So it's time for the best thing in the world, which is rampant speculation. The compositions, gentlemen and ladies. So let's just start with it. What surprised you the most? What was the most out of the box thing that you started seeing when the compositions came in?
Dragoons, just so many Dragoons.
Yeah, 4 out of 8 teams brought them. Half of the teams seemed to think that they were one of the 5 best support options. Out of all of the T1 frigates and all of the T1 destroyers in the game, the Dragoon was up there.
I'm just impressed to see like some comps, or not comps, but some ships that like I never really see on Tranquility. So I think the first one that comes to mind is the Eris, ERIS, which is the T2 like interdictor, as tackle instead of like another scepter or another dictor out of all of them. So just some ships like that where I would be like, I wouldn't really think that people would actually pick that over the plethora of other ships that they can be using.
Also, the general meta that we see on like the comp spreadsheet, it's kind of confusing because with the last slot you can bring in things like T1 frigates, T1 destroyers, E-War frigates, and the meta is for the last SSI, and I think for this SSI, based on what we see here, is very projection based. The better you project damage and can receive damage at distances, the better you're going to do. But most teams didn't really use that last slot to use E-War frigates like your Griffin, your Maulus, and very importantly, like the Maulus and the Crucifier for damps and TDs to limit that projection. I don't know if this was like the captain's missing that meta or not. What do you guys think?
I think personally it's because a lot of these matches seem to be ending in just people fighting it out. The lack of logistics means that you can absolutely never stabilize, and there's always a risk of your opponents coming back. So just having a lot of DPS in your comp allows you to snowball faster and get to the point where your opponents just call the match. And I suspect that's why we see such a focus on these T1 destroyers. Like, in the Goon compositions, they've got catalysts in there. In some compositions, we've got things like Thrashers and Synesises. And it's interesting to note that there are some teams that have completely avoided that dimension, though. Not Stay Frosty, sorry. Yes, Spooky Action, Brave Newbies, and Zero all seem to have had... Oh, no, sorry, Zero Talent are one of the teams that did what you said. They don't have any of that tackle, any of that E-War at all. Just tackle. Hard tackle.
Yep.
Yeah, you definitely see a bit of a stylistic choice difference between the two teams there. I personally, like Cyclo kind of mentioned, I prefer seeing E-War applied and being able to mitigate incoming damage. I'm interested to see, though, what led to Zero Talent choosing to not opt for that and choosing for a more aggressive, harder tackle frigates and support in that wing instead.
Mm-hmm.
So curiosity, because they can technically fit their ships however they want. So can't you just have unbonused sort of E-War mids as long as it's like not scripted and whatnot?
Yep, you absolutely can.
So I mean, I wonder if some teams are opting to go that route where they may have some sort of E-War, it's just not going to be as strong. Especially with like, because I mean, if you look at the E-War ships, a lot of these are T1 E-War. So if you think like a Griffin versus a Kitsune, like a Kitsune is really, really strong. And a Griffin's like kind of great at it, but if you can just have another ship that might be tankier or might be able to do damage more than a Griffin, then maybe it's worth kind of that sacrifice to do like
Mm-hmm.
unbonused hold
Yeah.
or whatever.
Why don't
And
you talk a
to
little bit about that, the E-War though? Like, you talked about projection. How do these E-War ships kind of interact with that projection? We've got these damps. How does that impact the format?
So let's take, say, a Brutix Navy issue, which just about every team's brought a Brutix Navy issue because in this format, it's pretty strong. If you have sensor dampeners, you can limit it so it can't hit you at range. That's going to be at least 300 to 400 damage off the table at a decent range, and that's also damage that your potentially Brutix Navy issue or whatever battlecruiser you have and the other ships are able to apply that damage to whatever targets they want on your team. And not only is this one damp on the Brutix Navy issue, it's possibly 3 damps on it. So it can't lock things till they get really close. Or maybe it's 1 damp on each of the top end of the enemy team, so they don't have their battle cruiser, their heavy cruiser, or their regular cruiser. It's really potentially crippling.
Mm-hmm. And ECM was something that I was really, really surprised to see in this format, especially given the changes, because now you don't just completely lock someone out with a jam. They can shoot you back, and in a format with so many cruisers and heavy cruisers, and those being the things that you want to jam, the fact that you would then bring a Griffin that can still just get shot out the sky by like 2 RLML volleys is super interesting to me. I think that shows a lot of confidence in people's individual piloting skills. They seem to feel like they can make sure their Griffin survives even if it gets shot, because that's something that's really, really important in the format. Like, player skill, especially in that low end, is incredibly important. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what it's like to fly in high pressure in a small ship, Mawderator.
When I was playing in the Alliance tournament, I was mostly a Tech 3 destroyer main. So basically, in those days, you had to be very aware of, what kind of threats there are on field for incoming damage and how you're going to get around those kind of death balls of projected damage and being able to apply yours meaningfully and just execute good trades, get good tackle. And it's probably one of, if not the most demanding positions behind, I would say, logistics. It's pretty up there. But hey, I will leave it to Cyclo because he's a little bit more up to date on the current meta than I would be.
Yeah, it's very difficult. A little bit of background. I'm like a really big destroyer pilot in tournaments right now. Well, like not big, but I spend pretty much all my time in destroyers. And having a high sig but somewhat low tank, especially in this meta, because I've had the chance to practice a little bit, it's really difficult, but it can be survivable. It depends on how you pilot, how risky you get. I can definitely see some of these smaller ships like the Griffins, the Molluses, your Dragoons, your Pontifexes, Heretics, living for a good portion of time. And as you said, Jin, the Griffin has to have high confidence that it can dodge those rapid light missile launchers. Well, for every round that's launched from those rapid lights at the Griffin that doesn't kill it or that doesn't hit because of distance or what have you, that's damage that's not being applied to the rest of the enemy team. And in this format, that can really add up and become important. The longer you shoot at, say, a destroyer that's not taking very much damage and not going down, or a frigate of the same variety, the less chance you have to win.
Yeah, that's something I've really seen in these matches is that if you tunnel in on one of these smaller targets and you don't kill it almost immediately, you're gonna leave yourself open to such a brutal counterattack because all of your tackle is heading away from your fleet. You can't screen anything off, and it just tends to lead to fleets that have more firepower getting on top of you quickly. And I think that's gonna be really interesting to see. I watched a flycatcher survive like 2 minutes getting shot by a caracal, a Serb, and a brute. It was insane. I don't know how you can do that, but he pulled it off. And why don't we talk a little bit less about this support though, and get right into the top end and talk about the biggest meme of the tournament, which is the Drake Navy issue, which is a ship that I was fairly sure no one was going to pick, and it turns out that like 7 out of the 8 teams brought it or something. I'm just checking now.
Everyone chose to bring their Drake Navy issue, and we can see that it very stylistically fits into a comp that every team has brought a variation of. We see, for example, on Spooky Action at a Distance, they have a Drake Navy issue, a Cerberus, a Caracal Navy, a Flycatcher, a Hyena, and a Merlin, all in a comp. And I mean, that's pretty indicative right there of what they want to do. They want to use light missiles and heavy missiles and kite away at long range, apply that damage as far away from everything as they can, and just gun people down and just try not to take damage. So, I mean, every team's bringing some variation of that. So it's got to be strong in this format.
Yeah, every team is bringing some variation of that. But not only that, there's quite a few teams that are bringing that top end exactly. The Drake Navy issue, the Cerberus, and the Caracal Navy issue. And what I find interesting is those are all pretty tanky ships. If I was facing that down as someone who wants to get on top of them and brawl with, say, the best possible comp with a Brutix Navy issue, say, I would look at that and I wouldn't know at first what to really target. It's all really tanky. The Drake Navy issue tankier than most. Drake Navy issue does a lot of damage. The rest is going to do a good amount of damage. I think it's going to be a hard comp to face.
Yeah, another kind of similar top end that we saw a lot of was the Brutix Navy issue plus Zealot, or Brutix Navy issue plus Deimos. Adding the 2 armor long range hacks alongside the Brutix Navy issue just gives you so much range and tracking that it seems to be able to kind of just kill all the other cruisers in the format, and that's just all that's needed to make that just incredibly viable. What do you guys think about these precursor ships? Because we see them kind of spread around rather than concentrated in any one team. Why do you guys think that is? Do you think that they are powerful enough that you want to always have access to one if you can? Or do they all need different support to work?
I actually don't think they're that powerful at all. Mainly because of the ramp. Sure, you can apply at distance, you can project, which is important in this tournament. However, you're projecting with Mizan, which I believe it's called Mizan, which isn't going to do as much damage. And once your target's getting closer, you're going to want to switch to an occult-based ammo. And that's going to get rid of your ramp, and you're going to have to start ramp all over again if they do manage to get closer. Plus, then if you get TD'd or you break range, you've got to ramp again. So overall, it could be less applied damage over time than, say, one of the Navy battle cruisers. The Drekovic's an interesting pick, and I don't know if I would have taken it for one of my teams.
Really? You don't think you would have taken a Drekvac? What do you think are some of the better battle cruiser options that could have been taken instead of the Drekvac?
It all depends on your strategy, but a better battle cruiser option, in my opinion, would be either a Rail Brutix or a Rail Harbinger. They're not going to be as good as their Navy counterparts. However, I think they'll still get the job done pretty well.
Yeah, so I think they definitely do have a certain role in this event. I mean, every team has picked one. You have, I guess, about 10 real battle cruisers to choose from. No one really going for the Gnosis. People choosing almost exclusively to go for the faction battle cruisers, and then to use another one of either the Harbinger or the Ferox, because the Ferox is just where it's at. A very good ship. But we see a lot of these stylistic choices where the Drekvac is paired with either a Vedmak or it's being paired with another Tech 2 cruiser that is just known for being able to get in your face and brawl someone down. And I think teams are expecting to be able to close range and just get on top of people. Whether or not that pans out is going to depend entirely on whether or not people can actually use their tackle lane to get on top of people.
Were there any?
Oh no, I was just gonna say, it seems like a lot of these teams love the Triglavian ships. I think all but one or two picked the Kiki, over half picked the Vedmak, and all of them picked the Dracovic. So I think that kind of speaks to either I mean, I don't know, maybe they just doubt some of the other options, but it seems like these are actually going to be really strong in the tournament, like we saw
Every team picked Kikimora, by the way.
Oh, every team
in
did?
at least
Okay.
one of, yeah, because it's such a powerful ship.
Yeah, and so, I mean, granted, they're more known for like being kitey ships, but and I know how much fun kiting is in a tournament when you have a 150-kilometer range, or not range, arena area. But I don't know. I think that kind of speaks to how strong they can be.
Just dealing with something. Don't worry. But there any ships that you guys didn't? Well, is there any ships that you guys expected to see that you didn't? You know, I think that's really interesting. You know, what are some power picks that you thought you were going to see more of? I know personally, I was expecting to see way more Sentinels than I did. You know, it just seems like such a powerful ship in this format.
Sentinel is definitely a big one. Its ability to shut down the tank and abilities of pretty much any of the lower end of a comp that comes after it is pretty impressive. Plus, sprinkle in some TD action there, and you've got a pretty strong ship for the current meta. I was actually a little disappointed we're not seeing more of it, but I think it might contribute to a more interesting meta.
I was thinking we'd see more for like the T2 command destroyers, because I know a lot of folks just like swear by the links, like they're really strong ships. But there's some teams where like they only have one or two in their comps, and then there are other teams where like they pick them every single time. So I'm impressed more teams didn't pick them. So maybe we'll see, like I think it's the T2 T2 frigs, like Ewar frigs, or the Kiki and other destroyers kind of being a little more optimized or whatever.
Yeah, the T2 support is definitely the role where you have like so much flexibility, though, that it has the widest range of utility you can possibly bring. You know, you can bring your hyenas if you want to add application to your comp and a bit of web control. You can put in any of the link ships, like you said, but you can also put in the Kikimora. You can add a ton of damage that way. You can add the Magus specifically, which has damage of its own. The Sentinel is like this incredible anti-frigate frigate.
And to add to that a little bit, the power that you can bring forth with those command destroyers, especially if you can keep them alive, is really great. The links you can put, if you like finagle the fitting quite a bit, you could put potentially up to 3 online links onto a command destroyer. So you could increase the speed of your comp. You could increase 2 things about the tank of it as well, whether it's shield or armor. And on top of that, we have the fact that the command destroyers, unlike the battle cruisers, actually get strength bonuses to links, which is huge. And it's weird to kind of see that be so ignored in this meta.
Yeah, I was also really surprised not to see a Munin at all. None of these teams really went down the route of taking one of what we see as one of the most powerful hacks on TQ, right? And I think that just belies that there are different things needed in this tournament than there is in TQ for fleet combat. We could also probably see that by the fact that some teams brought in Ashamu, which is definitely not one of the best cruisers in the game, by my reckoning.
it's not one of the best cruisers in the game, but it's if you look at the comps that it's kind of pushed into, there are comps that want to catch kiters or just brawl really quickly and apply really well at that range. And the Ashmu is kind of in an interesting position. It doesn't apply amazingly at range. However, it enables other things too. You said that the Hyena had the long range webs, but the Ashmu does as well. And it's also a very tanky platform and can do some damage as well as field some drones.
Yeah, one of the reasons we don't see it a lot in TQ is because it's kind of slow and it is kind of relatively low tank. But when you're putting it up against these hacks that have kind of similar-ish EHPs, they're generally going to have a little more, but if you are active tanking them, it's not that big of a difference. The main disadvantage you have is not having that ADCU. You can get a lot of play out of these Ashimus, and it's going to be really fun to see how teams use them to zone, like tackle and things like that as well, because their NOS and Newt bonuses are surprisingly strong, especially against frigates. You know, those things can just zap, you know, your average Punisher or your Atrons or whatever out of the sky and just stop them dead.
100%. And I did practice with a few different teams, and as a destroyer pilot, whenever I see that Ashimu, I have to be really careful with my approaches to stay at like 32 to 35 kilometers out, just to make sure I don't get wept down, because if I'm being shot at by the entire team, okay, I can kind of get a good angle, not take too much damage, and maybe they'll stop shooting me in a bit, or I'll just fly away and they'll have wasted all that time. But with the Ashimu, that web reaches out and touches me, I'm going to be dead in a matter of seconds. It's really strong, kind of as a deterrent as well.
Awesome. And you know, the other main ship that we never see on TQ that we saw here is the Eris, the ERIS. What a ship.
Yeah.
2 mids, boys. 2 mids.
You can get like 800 DPS or something if you polarize the guns, but trying to get that close with blasters in a ship that doesn't have a lot of tank, oh man, I can't wait to see how it plays out for the teams that brought them. I hope they find glory.
Yeah, that was like the weirdest pick I think I saw compared to, because you can use any of the other dictors, you can use any of the scepters, and so like that was the weirdest one that stuck out to me. I also am like kind of laughing about the Caracal Navy, because I remember, so CCP buffed it recently, right? Like they gave it a drone bay or whatever it was, and like literally all the comments were Caracal Navy's garbage, like why would you use it? And then here we actually see it being picked over like the normal Caracal or any of the other cruisers. So I was like,
and
okay.
This is actually in their pre-buff state. It doesn't have it doesn't have the drones. It's completely useless right now.
So it makes me like, it's really interesting though, because like you have 2 ships that aren't really seen on TQ at all, but here they are in like a lot of these comps. Like the Ares maybe not as much, but the Caracal Navy I think is every team like at a quick glance. But yeah, like that's surprising to me, where you know, normally you wouldn't really expect this type of behavior from teams but apparently if you have 6v6, you know, in a very like compact arena, maybe it's actually will be like the shining star of a comp or something along those lines.
Yeah, the main reason that I see a lot of teams picking this Caracal Navy issue is they want to put it into that Drake comp 3rd slot for their high end. And the reason they want to do that over the Caracal is the tank. It's just got so much more tank, and it still applies pretty okay in the format, especially to top ends. I also find it really interesting that I doubt all these teams practice together, yet almost every team, or pretty much every team, found the Drake Navy issue high 3-ship top end tank meta.
Yeah, one of the other things that was really interesting to see is which teams went for drone teams and which teams, you know, it's kind of one of those compositions that I think everyone tries almost every tournament. You just check to see if it's good or not. And it's interesting to see that teams have come to different conclusions there. You know, some teams are running the Ishtar, Vexor, Myrmidon kind of triple combo of all the drones ever. Oh no, sorry, no one's bringing that exact thing, but they've spread that around their compositions, or they've used a Brutix Navy in the place of the Myrmidon to just give it that little bit of extra turret. And it's going to be fun to see how those go, especially given that there aren't really any ships in this format that can field a smart bomb, which is what we see as the typical counter to drone teams.
Well, when we do see those drone teams get fielded against another team, the thing I'm going to be looking for, and I'm sure everyone's going to be looking for, is the primary target of their opponent. Is that team taking damage, the drone team, or are they not? Because if they're not taking damage, then that competitor team is just wiping the field of the drones. And one of the reasons we don't see a very strong drone meta here, in my opinion, is that you don't have a lot of ships that can have multiple flights of really damaging drones, even considering their T1. You have like the Ishtar and maybe the Gila, which both fill the same slot. So that's really it. So you can't base a really strong drone team around that because your drones could potentially just get shot right off the field before you can do much.
Yeah, I do have to give a shout out to the Healer for being the only pirate cruiser other than the Ashimu that actually got picked, because it's good enough that it basically counts as a heavy assault cruiser. It's only lacking the ADCU, and it's that level of power,
Yeah, and I was gonna say shooting Gila drones or Gila drones is like actually really obnoxious. A lot of these other ships, like if you're getting chased around by drones, you can kind of defend yourself, but when it's a Gila, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, and this is the old 500% bonus drones to it as well.
Yeah, it's pre-nerf, so it's still kind of in its strong iteration, but we're still only seeing 3 teams out of 8 bring them. So I find that pick kind of interesting. It kind of fits in. I'd say it wouldn't fit in as well as the Cerberus for that Drake Navy issue, Caracal Navy issue comp, but you can still get a Gila pretty tanky. It should be interesting to see how it plays out.
So did anyone else have any ships they wanted to point to here?
Can I just point to all the ships and say I'm really excited to see what these teams are going to bring skin-wise, because they're going to be on Thunderdome and therefore can use any skin. And I'm only mentioning it because I like skins, not because I'm secretly dropping hints for them in chat.
That is true, actually. Fnick Lol brings up a good point, which is, what about the Cyclone? And that is very astute, because the Cyclone seems like such an odd duck in that battlecruiser. Unlike all of the rest of them, which are just traditionally powerful ships, with the exception of the Drake Navy issue, we've never really seen the Cyclone in a tournament before. It's never served a huge amount of purpose. Why do you guys think that teams have brought that?
I think using range, if they're heavy missile fit, I don't know how these things are fit, but if they're heavy missile fit, using range to sort of mitigate damage, using a single XLASB, you'll be able to keep yourself up in the Cyclone for a little bit. Or if you're using, say, an XLSB and dual inject, you could probably do the same. But if teams are able to get close to and truly apply damage to these Cyclones, I think they'll go down a lot faster, and I don't think they'll really be able to accomplish much. What do you guys think?
They fill a fairly similar role to what they did in Event T, though you have no real fitting restrictions here. Is that you try to get on top of something and just get on them, apply damage, use your XLASB and your tank bonus. We see it paired with a Gila, a Mo, a Saber, a Kikimora, and a Merlin on the Zero Talent Allowed team. They're not even really trying to hide what they're doing with that team. I mean, they're going to get on top of you. They're going to apply all of the damage and try to do so pretty quickly. And then you have, on Brave Newbies, you have a Cyclone, a Vagabond, Caracal Navy issue, Ares, Heine, and Merlin, where you've got the Cyclone and the Vagabond paired together, just trying to get on top of people, use that active tanking bonus, and do damage there.
So, Mod, you think it's going to be a brawl comp? Looking at those comps, do you primary the Cyclone first? Say you're one of the Brutix Navy projection.
If I'm the Brutix Navy projection comp, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to pick off everything else that can hold me down, and then probably worry about the Cyclone later, because the Cyclone can only hold down one ship, and I've got everything else that can kite away while this one ship is being held down, or maybe I can even screen the Cyclone. You've got options here, but I like the Zero Talent comp more, I would say, than the Brave Newbies comp.
So, one final question that I want to throw out to everyone here, and that's, what's the ship you're most looking forward to seeing on the field? You know, what one do you think is going to bring us the interesting stories this time?
I think maybe this is kind of a blanket statement, pretty generic, but I think watching some of the tackle ships and the E-war ships is like the most exciting thing to watch in like a tournament, because sometimes they'll make really, really amazing plays where, like, you know, you have like a tanky Punisher running in and just tackling down some of those like kitey ships, or, you know, something along those lines, or like some of the E-war ships getting like really good like damps or like jams off on their opponent. And then at the same time, when you're watching them, they also are the ones to almost make some of the like worst mistakes. Like, it's very easy for some of these like kiting, like a Kitsune or a Carries, to like try to be kiting and try to stay away from their opponent, and then they like boundary violate. So those are really almost always the ships I'll look at, which I don't know. I always just find them entertaining.
Those will be some interesting ships to look at. Those are always generally there's a lot of really high skilled pilots in those ships, because they kind of have to be, because they'll die so quickly if they aren't. But what I'm looking forward to right now is seeing how the Demos and the Vagabonds both play out, because they both have a pretty beefy tank, and if they are allowed to survive into the late game, I don't know if there's enough damage on field to really break those. So it'll be interesting to see how one of those being on field really changes the playstyle and the strategy of teams.
Yeah, and that's important because of the tiebreaker rule. Because we haven't been able to use the point system in this format, obviously, as we don't have a point system, what we have done instead is effectively said that if whoever has the biggest class of ship left alive will win. So if your battle cruiser is alive and your opponent has, and everything else on your team is dead, and your opponents have all their team alive, but you've killed their battle cruiser, the battle cruiser alone will win. And that kind of encourages teams to go away from the traditional style of play in the format. You know, typically we see people go after the small ships, try and get those early catches and put themselves in a lead. Whereas here, you're incentivized to go right for the headshot, try and kill the battle cruiser, get it out of the way, and then fight your way on from there. And personally, by the way, the ship that I'm going to be most looking forward to seeing is the Stabber Fleet issue. And that's not just because we don't see it very often on TQ, it's actually fairly common. But in this tournament, I found that it plays such a really interesting flex role, depending on how teams want to use it in any given matchup. Like, it's fast enough that it can serve as this light tackle screening thing, because it's survivable enough that it can run in, hold down a heavy cruiser for a while, let the rest of your team position, and then probably even disengage if it has a nuke. And that turns out to be really powerful, but it's also got this great anti-tackle like capability. It can chase after frigates or just protect one of your other cruisers and stop tackle from getting on top of it equally. And that kind of flexibility just means that when you watch a good Stabber Fleet issue pilot at work, you can just see them doing so much all throughout the game to kind of push momentum in their team's favor.
Oh yeah, that'll be excellent to watch. The Stabber Fleet issue, one of the reasons it's so tanky is, for a cruiser, it has a really low sig. If I'm not mistaken, it has the lowest signature of any T1 or faction, possibly even T2 cruiser. And I think it'll work really well like that. It's also got a decent speed, which will help with the disengagement, like you were saying, Jin'taan.
Yeah, it's kind of like how everyone jokes that the Stabber is the best cruiser in the game. The Stabber is the best frigate in the game. The Stabber Fleet issue is the best faction frigate in the game.
Yes.
So, Rain, Maud, what are you two both looking forward to here?
I'm looking forward to probably seeing how the Nomen pilots go, or what kind of comps they really slate into. Is the Omen Navy issue known for being kind of a long-range kitey platform on Tranquility for the most part, but you can also make it into a brawler, given that it's got 7 low slots, so it can flex. So that's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, any of like the Ewar frigates or the Tackle frigates are pretty much what I'm going to be watching out for. Especially like I want to say like the underdogs. Like I always see like Punisher. Punishers always do like the hero tackle stuff, and I'm super excited to watch them.
I actually have an interesting question for you guys. We see a very blatant lack of E-War cruisers. The only one that I see right now is Stay Frosty bringing a Blackbird. Do you think that in this meta, the E-War cruiser just isn't worth the points because it doesn't put out the damage, or is it too easy to bring down too quickly? What do you guys think the state of that is?
I think it's just the format here. Like, it's going to be so hard to keep a a Celestis or a arbitrator. Oh no, we do see an arbitrator. I'm pretty sure someone brought one of.
Yeah, I believe it was Templis. They have an arbitrator.
Yes, they have it in their TD comp, but it's hard to keep those things alive nonetheless. It's just how long is one of those things going to be able to survive versus a Brudix Navy issue shooting at it, or an Eagle shooting at it, or an Execra Navy issue getting on top of it. It's just going to be so hard for those things to survive and really apply their utility over the length of the match and get the advantage that they don't give initially through EHP or DPS by reducing their opponent's DPS and mobility throughout the match. You got to think about those E-War cruisers less as I'm bringing a ship and more I'm going to turn off my opponent's ships.
Yeah, and I also think that the T1 E-War frigates in the last slot actually fill those roles a lot better as well, because they're a lot harder to kill. They can stay alive a lot longer, waste a lot more of their opponent's DPS, as well as they're just about as effective. I think the Arbitrator has like 4 mids. It has enough for like 3 or 4 TDs, and I think you can get 3 TDs on the Crucifier. So for filling that slot, I think it might be better to go with that T1 frigate anyway.
I was gonna say.
All right.
Oh, I was gonna say we also we're not talking fit specifically, but if you think some of these normal cruisers, if they're not having tackle mids or tank mids, then they could always just use bonus E-War mids as well. Like I know some people put them in Vexers. I think is the one the one that always comes to mind is you armor tank it, and then you put just like some random like E-War mids on it.
All right. Well, I think that is almost our time up on the channel. So it's been great to see everyone in the chat, and I hope you guys are excited. The tournament is going to be on the 20th. So that's next Saturday, starting at 2000 Eve time. We hope you guys are there for the first match, which will be Zero of Talent versus Red versus. After that, as said, we will have Templar's Calciv versus Stay Frosty. Then we'll have House Gundor versus Brave Nubbies. And then after that, finally, we'll have Spooky Action at a Distance versus Old Daddy J's Best Boys. And then we'll go into the rest of the bracket and find out which 4 teams are going to be staying with us for the next weekend and which 4 teams are going to be going home. So with that, fly smart, everyone, and we'll see you on Saturday.